I love the Miata, which is why I was so excited when CJ Wilson Racing and Continental Tires invited us down here to Texas to drive 2 of their Miatas. Not 1, but 2. On my right, we have an NA. It's a 92. And under the hood is a delicious engine that did not come with the car. And on the left, we've got the Continental Tire Challenge ST Class CJ Wilson Racing MX-5, which, as you could guess, is a race car. Now, we have come to Parasail Raceway outside Austin, Texas today, and if you can see me shivering from there, temperatures are hovering around 40 degrees. It's been raining on and off all day. This is gonna be interesting. I'm just hoping I don't wreck one of them. Let's find out. That's because these cars are no joke. Properly sorted machines built by a whole team, not just a dude in a shed, and drive certainly doesn't pay enough for me to fix one of them if I have a bad shunt. Plus, I heard the guy who owns this team has a unique ability to throw things at a very high velocity, and I wouldn't want to be on the other end of a socket wrench at a 90-mile-an-hour approach. CJ Wilson Racing is how the Anaheim Angels pitcher fills his need for speed, and the man knows his racing. His team of professionals down here in Austin build and prep MX-5s for the Playboy Cup, as well as for the Continental Tire Challenge Series, and these cars are serious business. Though every single one of these race cars begins life as a normal MX-5 right off the showroom floor, once arriving here, they're stripped, seam welded, caged, and fabbed until they're ready for their new life as either Playboy Cup or Conti Challenge cars. Everything is done in-house. Everything required to build and maintain this huge fleet of race cars for a whole season is done right here. It's both very cool and ridiculously intimidating to get to the track just in time to see a massive $1 million race hauler show up to unload the cars that someone was crazy enough to let me drive. I don't take these kinds of assignments lightly. After all, even a gentleman driver has to get lots of supervised instruction and write a massive check before getting behind the wheel of one of these cars. But apparently, because I have video cameras, I don't need any of those things, as long as I don't break it. Welcome to Harris Hill Raceway, a 1.8-mile, 11-turn private racetrack just 30 minutes from downtown Austin. Thankfully, it's a rather open track with good visibility, plenty of runoff, and a rather marvelous 80-foot drop-off at the end of turn 4. Today, we've got it all to ourselves. First, the V8 powered NA Miata, owned and built by Andres, the team's crew chief.
At CJ Wilson Racing, we run 2 Mazda MX-5 race teams. We run 2 cars in the Continental Tire Challenge Series ST class, and we run 5 of them in the Playboy MX-5 Cup Series. I wanted to build a more powerful Miata, and most of the turbocharged Miatas I'd seen were still fairly slow, considering all the work people did to them. So I wanted to do a V8 swap, and the Lexus engine was just a more interesting choice than all the LS swaps I'd seen going on.
Y'all remember the first ever episode of The Smoking Tire? We drove a Miata in New York, and the answer to every question you could ask an automotive journalist is, of course, Miata. Except when the question is, how do I get more power out of a Miata? In which case the answer is V8. Now there are lots of V8 kits, the 5-liter Ford, LS engines, of course, from Flying Miata and those companies. This is a Lexus engine, and you might be thinking to yourself, well, who cares about a Lexus engine? Well, I mean, let me just demonstrate. It's good. It's delicious. It sounds good too. That's a 32-valve Lexus 4-liter V8 out of an LS 400, which I happened to own back in the day. It was a great engine, but it was quiet and it was tame, and I never really thought it could be in a Miata track car. So, here we are, Parasail Raceway. Listen to that! Oh yes, very nice. This track, on the other hand, cool, very bumpy. Oh, the pedal feels brilliant. The brake pedal feels awesome. Look, the turn in. There we go, over the crest. It feels like a little race car. A lot of grip here. Even though it's 40 degrees outside, even though it's on the verge of raining, the car's still doing real well. Temperatures stand right in the middle. At only 2,400 pounds, the Lexus V8 is hauling around just over half what it originally had to haul around. The steering feel is great, but the steering effort is not low. Granted, he built a lot of it himself, so if you were to replicate it, it would probably cost quite a bit of money, but man, if this thing isn't 15 grand worth of fun, I don't know what is.
I've had a lot of people that look at this car, they open the hood and they go, oh, this makes sense. They're both early 90s jet from Japan. Like, it kind of looks like it's plausible. This engine was never sold in the US, or actually sold anywhere in the world with a manual transmission behind it. So this actually has a Toyota Supra 5-speed. And there's a company in Australia that makes bell housings and clutch kits to mate various manual transmissions to this motor. So I have a bell housing and clutch from that company. And then the rear end is all Turbo 2 RX-7 stuff.
If there's anyone you're going to trust building you a V8 Mazda swap, it's probably the crew chief of a team that races MX-5s. It's probably a good choice. This engine feels like it belongs in the car. Conversely, this car is great with this engine. The engine is great because it has a really wide torque band. Starts at about, I don't know, 2,000 RPM, goes about 6,500, but you don't feel like you have to wind out the engine all the way all the time. Even if you short shift and go up a gear, the car is so light that the power just keeps on coming.
People used to always ask me why I built it, and I was like, well, I'm not building a race car. I just want a car I can drive around like an ass on the street. A lot of people ask about V8 swap Miatas, and they go, oh, you probably just ruined what was a perfect car. And I'm like, well, it's still a 2,400 pound car with 52-48 weight distribution, so maybe it's not 50-50 anymore, and maybe it's not 2,300 pounds, but if you look at what the resulting car is, it's still pretty competitive for toy cars. My favorite thing about the car is the sound, and then a close second is doing burnouts. People get out, usually they're smiling.
Damn, is this thing badass. Well, now that we've seen what a quick tuner Miata is like, what the guys from the race team build in their free time, I think it's time to see what they build when they're on the clock. What a really fast Miata is like. This car, I'd imagine, would normally be a ridiculous amount of fun, but there may be something holding me back. The weather. When you come to Texas, you don't exactly plan for a massive rainstorm, standing water all over the racetrack, and the temperature hovering just a few degrees above freezing. But we had an entire race team that got up at the crack of dawn to help us film today, so as always, we made do. The team fired up the Conti race car, installed some Continental rain tires, and handed it off to pro driver Mark Miller for a few shakedown laps and to set a few data benchmarks. Though as a multi-race winner within the series, he's clearly qualified to run in any condition. Even with this small engine, it didn't appear to want to, go straight. And I'm supposed to go out there and not embarrass myself in front of this entire team? I really can't stress enough how intimidating it is to be about to get into a full-on race car that I've never driven, on a track I've barely driven, with everyone watching, in the freezing cold and pouring rain, and set a lap time compared to a pro driver who races this car for a living? As I pulled out on the track, I was thinking a few things. This seat is really meant for someone much smaller than me. These windshield wipers are not that great. I can't feel my fingers or my toes. What is the speed I can go that will put enough heat in the tires that they will work, but before I sail off the track into a swamp? I felt like I was crawling, and because this was a race car, the engine would bog and buck if you let it drop below 4,000 RPM, but then you'd put your foot in it to keep the revs up, and it would just spin the back wheels like crazy. I might as well have had 1,000 horsepower in these conditions, because even a Miata's little four-banger just couldn't keep the tires on the ground.
This car is rear drive, low horsepower. Handling and cornering ability and braking ability are all the top notch. So what we try to do is to get the optimum lap out of this car is all corner entry speed, is all turn into apex. So when you can get off the brake much earlier than everyone else, carry more apex speed, that's when we can generate the lap. So in traffic, we're at a disadvantage, but when we're out front, we can really string laps together that can keep us out front. To really drive this car well, you have to get the most out of what it's already good at and getting the most out of the Continental tires that are on it and be able to handle corner entry speed. You have to push through that safety zone that an average driver has. You have to carry entry speed more, almost like a madman. My co-driver, Steven, is a Scottish lad, and he would say beast mode on. You pretty much have to carry beast mode all the way into corner entry and not be afraid of it. Just about every corner I enter, at one point, I think this is too fast. And every time I get to the middle of the corner and roll throttle, and it's fine. So I don't think there's ever a time where I've gone through and thought there's not a little bit more that you can carry it, or what can we do to make it even better. But at that point, we're already running over the back of other people because the car's just so good on corner entry, and we have to do that to make up what we lose on the straightaways.
Harris Hill might have a rain line, but I certainly didn't know it, and even if I did, when it's 34 degrees outside, does it even matter? On the upside, the MX-5, compared to other race cars anyway, is incredibly forgiving, with dynamics much closer to a street car than, say, the Turner M3 from our first season. It has an easy clutch, a light steering rack with lots of feedback, the brakes have actual modulation, and all the things we've grown to love about the Miata road car are right here in the race car, just cranked up to 12. I can see why people like to race these things, and even though I'm struggling a bit at the moment, it's still fun. But you can't really tell what a chassis, the power band, the brakes or tires are capable of when you're essentially driving on a sheet of ice. It's all just a bit silly. I consider myself very fortunate that an entire race team would take their time out to roll a transporter and two very special cars to a track in the middle of winter in the freezing cold just so I could get some seat time. And these are special cars. Though the weather didn't really feel like cooperating today, you can still tell how great a Miata can be with a V8 in the front. And no, that V8 does not need to have a zillion horsepower. This thing is small and light, so even a basic swap does wonders without killing the balance. And the race car, it's the kind of thing that's accessible for an amateur like me while still being rewarding for a pro like Mark. We can comfortably return home to sunny California, maintaining that whatever the question was, the answer is always Miata.